Hey, up right, a full review of this here Royal Enfield BEAR 650 Interceptor. We've been using this bike as a daily hack for about, well, more or less 2 weeks now, both with and without pillion, and the pillion report will be coming up this Friday. Today is just the general review of the bike. Now, we've actually worked the BEAR quite hard. Paula's got a new project, a new kitchen, which means we're running about from one supplier and designer to another, getting tile samples, paint samples, worktop samples, colour samples for the kitchen units, designing the kitchen, redesigning the kitchen, redesigning it again, and I think we've got a few more visits before that's finished. Now, actually, a motorcycle is the perfect vehicle for this kind of thing, so you don't really need to carry much with you. And then on top of that, I've had quite a few hours of runs out on it on my own to sort of, get sort of both halves of the story with this bike, with and without pillion. And I've got to say, I'm impressed. Now, one thing that I do need to make clear that wasn't immediately apparent to me on the original walk round video is that Royal Enfield have substantially beefed up the frame on the BEAR 650. The frame is pretty much the same as the original Interceptor frame, but there are some changes in the dimensions of the tubing, which are not immediately apparent when you look at the bike. It takes time for you to spot the differences. Now, I'm sure Royal Enfield's line on this is that it needed to be beefed up because of the sort of scrambler connotations that this bike has. But, as I've said in the past, frame flex is a little bit of an issue at times with the original Interceptor, especially when you're carrying a pillion. And these modifications that Royal Enfield have made to the frame have made an enormous difference. It'll be interesting to see whether they adopt this frame or something similar for the original Interceptor in the future. Now, one thing I do want to mention, because I think it can be seen in this footage, is that there's a misalignment between the steering and the tank. And over the years, I've come across this a few times on Royal Enfields. My Classic 500 has the same issue. My Classic 350 also had the same issue, and I've seen it on 1 or 2 press bikes. Now, I've always sort of passed this off as possibly being due to the way that they were strapped down in vans when they were delivered, because in all cases these are bikes that have been delivered fully built in a van. And I should add that in all the years that I've been covering Royal Enfields on this channel, I've never had a comment from anybody pointing out this issue with their bike. So I am going to put it down to the way that the bike's been transported. Possibly if they've strapped the handlebars in a certain way, it may have twisted things or shifted the tank. I don't really know. I know on my Classic 350 I did solve it by loosening the tank off and repositioning it, but yeah, people are possibly going to mention it in this video, so I thought I'd better bring your attention to it. Now we've got that out of the way, obviously the BEAR is a scrambler. That's what the original Interceptor was intended to be, a desert sled. And to that end, they've changed the position of the handlebars very slightly. They've raised them by about 1 inch and brought them back slightly towards the rider with different handlebar mounts. And that alteration is very welcome. On the original Interceptor, you did feel like you were leaning forward a little bit too far for comfort. I mean, a lot of people fix this by putting aftermarket mounts that do the same thing. It's nice to see that Royal Enfield have done that here. Obviously, it's part of the styling of this bike, but I would like to see that on the original Interceptors as well as standard. I don't know if Royal Enfield have fitted different handlebars to this bike. I don't think they have. They're not particularly wide. They're perfect for the riding position. You feel very relaxed from your shoulders to your hands. It's a typical sit-up and beg stance with a very, very slight lean forward. Now, if you want all the facts and figures, seat height, etc., I suggest you look at a brochure so that you can digest it properly. There's very little point in me regurgitating it all here. As I've discussed before, I've got a 29-inch inseam. I can't fully flat foot it on the BEAR. It does seem a little bit taller than the original Interceptor, although I don't think there's much in it. But I can hold the bike up comfortably and securely, either solo or with a pillion. Foot peg positioning is very comfortable, but I did have an issue with the rear brake. The pedal is set quite high, so much so that in normal riding I can't cover the brake. I have to sort of dangle my foot over the edge of the foot peg at a weird angle. Otherwise it gets a bit uncomfortable, and I had to make a conscious effort each time I needed to use the back brake to actually find the pedal. It's not as intuitive as it should be. Now, everybody's different biologically. It might just be an issue with me, but it's worth bearing in mind. No such issues with the gear selector. It felt as though it was exactly where it needed to be. Royal Enfield have very carefully sculpted the profile of the rider's seat. I think in some ways to mitigate that extra bit of height. It works very well, and this is a very, very comfortable seat. In fact, of all the Royal Enfields that I've ridden as a standard seat straight out of the box, this is the best yet. Just like the Royal Enfield touring seats, this seat feels very firm, almost hard when you first sit on it, but don't let that put you off. Over long distances, long periods of time, it's very comfortable. The important thing is it provides lots of support for your body, and it's been sculpted perfectly for the riding position on this bike. There is just one little niggle though. While we were out and about, we got caught in several sort of rain showers, and that sort of perforated suede material that the cover's constructed from does tend to hold water. I normally carry a cloth or something just to dry the seat off, which is perfect for a vinyl seat, but I noticed this seat stays damp for sort of 10 or 15 minutes after you've wiped it, which could result in embarrassing wet marks on your backside when you get off the bike. Now, we all know the Royal Enfield 650 twin air oil-cooled engine well. They use it in several models now. It does feel slightly different in the Bear. It definitely feels smoother in all rev ranges compared to the classic 650, which was a bit of a pain in the ass, literally, after 60 miles an hour. Now, riding the Bear, I think, confirmed my suspicions that this is down to the seat and frame design. The Bear is a much more civilized machine in comparison. Comparing this bike with the BSA Gold Star 650 single, which obviously I ride quite a lot, there's a distinct lack of torque in the low rev ranges. There's nothing much there until you get to 2,500 revs, which means in slow stop-start traffic you end up having to work the gearbox quite hard to keep the engine on the boil, especially when you're carrying a pillion. This improves after 2,500 revs, but it doesn't really come on song until you hit about 4,000. And I would say that by the time you've hit sort of 3,500 revs, you can forget your gearbox and just use the throttle to take advantage of the horsepower and torque. At motorway speeds, I did detect a slight buzz through my right hand foot peg, and it wasn't bad, but it was noticeable. Other than that, everything was perfect. And the gearbox behaved impeccably all the time I was riding this bike. No glitches at any point whatsoever. Over a mixture of riding, including traffic work with and without pillion, country roads with and without pillion, and some motorway work with and without pillion, we got an average of 62 mpg. Which is about 10 miles to the gallon less than I experienced with the Classic. But then, the ergonomics of this bike, I think, do encourage you to ride it in a slightly more spirited manner. The MRF tyres on the Bear are a big improvement over those MRFs on the Classic 650. Substantially better road holding and grip, excellent cornering abilities, and none of that misbehaving that we had with the Classic 650 on certain road markings and road imperfections. It didn't show any signs of wanting to squirm or tranlam at any point that I was riding it. Now, the Bear being a naked bike, i.e. no fairing, it's actually very civilised for the rider at 70 miles an hour. There's nothing in the design of the front end of this bike that creates any turbulence. Air pressure is more noticeable around the helmet area, although again, it's not bad. And I do remember thinking to myself on this section of road that, I could quite literally ride this bike on a motorway for an hour or two easily without needing a break. So in that respect, it's very similar to the original Interceptor. Now, one thing I did notice with this bike, especially while going over the Humber Bridge, and these were not the worst wind conditions that I've ever experienced on this bridge while testing bikes, it is a little bit sensitive to side winds. More so with a pillion than without, but it is still there when you're riding solo. And it's a bit of an odd situation. Rather than it pushing you over, it felt as though it was sort of pulling the bike over from underneath you. Not dangerous, not unusual. A lot of bikes do this. It just seemed unusual because this is the first Royal Enfield I've tried this test with where I actually noticed some influence from the wind. Not a big thing, I just thought it was worth a mention. Right, let's deal with the suspension. Right, obviously the BEAR has had a huge suspension upgrade over the original Interceptor with the shower upside down forks on the front and some reworked shock absorbers, non-piggyback, at the back. The shower front forks actually feel quite different to those on the Shotgun and the Super Meteor. I'm not saying they are, because obviously the ergonomics and weight distribution of the bike all come into play in altering the way that they feel to the rider. They do feel slightly firmer compared to those other two bikes, but not in an obtrusive, uncomfortable way. They give really good feedback from what's happening on the road, which is exactly what you need on a bike like this. The BEAR is obviously a more sporty motorcycle than, say, the Super Meteor. It's a fine balance between performance and comfort, and I feel that these front forks are set up exactly right. So are the rear shocks. Now, one or two people commented on the last video that these are not progressive shocks. They are progressive shocks, but the softer coils are at the top where they sort of disappear into the shroud. It's also not a pronounced difference in the spacing between the windings. You still get a progressive spring rate, but it's not as pronounced as you would get on some more obvious coil differences on some shock absorbers. That's the way YSS do it. It gives you a comparatively soft reaction on the spring rate on the first sort of hit, if you like, from bumps on the road, with less tendency for those softer coils to lock up before the main coils kick in. And in my opinion, these are about as perfect as you will get out of a stock shock absorber. I'm not saying they can't be improved, but it's going to be hard to improve them. I'd describe the clutch action as pretty average. It's not particularly light, but it's certainly not heavy. The front brake is good to adequate. Nothing to shout home about. I would say it's about the same as it is on the standard Interceptor, to be honest. The rear brake, though, is a little bit keener than on the original Interceptor. It's not at the same level as the Classic or the other two 650 models, the Shotgun and the Super Meteor, but it is noticeably keener than the original Interceptor, which is a good thing, because I always thought it was a bit puny, to be honest, on the original bike. I'm not going to talk about how the brakes feel, whether they're progressive and things like that. I think it's all a lot of bunkum, to be quite honest. The important thing is they stop you when you need to stop, within the space that you need to stop in. The BEAR 650 is a light, agile, nimble bike. It's easy to handle at low speeds, very easy to move around, and really well balanced. It's a delight in slow moving traffic, even with a pillion on board. Royal Enfield have taken a good bike in the standard Interceptor and made it into a brilliant bike. Now, I do feel as though the BEAR 650 has lost some of that sort of modern classic feel that the original Interceptor had, with the upside down front forks and the in-your-face paint scheme. But deep down inside, I think that's been intentional on Royal Enfield's part, and it doesn't detract from this bike at all. It gets a lot of attention, even guys stopping me in the petrol station and asking me if you know, that's my bike outside. And when I replied, yes, it is, you get a big smile, a nod of approval, and a thumbs up. A lot of people stop to have a look at it. So, you know, just like every Royal Enfield, really, it attracts a lot of attention. It's taken Royal Enfield a long time, 5 or 6 years by my reckoning, to bring out what I think is a bike that's worthy of the Interceptor name. They seem to have sorted out most, if not all, of the gripes that people had with the original bike, and in doing so, there's no doubt in my mind they've created the best 650 currently in Royal Enfield's range of 650 motorcycles. I'm very impressed. It's an uncomplicated traditional roadster in scrambler guise. I don't doubt it's got some off-road capabilities, but I'm not an off-road expert, so I'm not going to comment on that. This is the perfect all-rounder. It's got the long legs, the comfort and the power for effortless long-distance touring, along with the performance, agility, balance and poise of a commuter. Roll those two together and you've got a bike that can do just about anything, and it'll do it well. I just wish they had some more conservative classic colour schemes. Right, once again, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this and my other videos, and in doing so helping to support this channel. I really do appreciate it. I'd also appreciate it if you would leave a like and consider becoming a subscriber if you're not already a subscriber. It does help me out. You can help me out in other ways by signing up to my Patreon page or leaving a donation via my PayPal account, details of which are in the video description down below, or you could just use the super thanks button underneath the video that you're watching now. Either way, it's much appreciated. I will of course be back on Friday with that pillion report, so until then, please ride safely and I'll see you soon.
Okay. Mm-hmm.